The post-wagon driver pulled up short 2 miles outside of Harrow's Crossing and said he didn't go that far out. He said it to the road ahead of him, not to her. Mara Duscolo stepped down without a word, pulled her bag from the flatbed, and settled the strap across her shoulder. The driver did not look back. She watched the wagon until it turned and was gone. Then she turned herself and looked at the road ahead, rutted, pale, running flat through grass the color of old rope in the late afternoon heat. 6 miles. She had walked longer on worse. She walked. The country out here was the kind that didn't apologize for itself. Flat and dry and enormous in a way that made the sky feel like a second ground pressing down from above. The heat came off the road in slow waves. Her boots raised small puffs of dust with each step, and the dust settled back without hurry, and the road gave nothing back. She had been in this territory 3 weeks, long enough to know that the West did not perform. It simply was. The land didn't care what she looked like walking through it, and she found that restful in a way she hadn't expected. She read the road the way she read a contract, not for what it said, for what it didn't. The ruts said heavy wagon traffic, regular. Someone was running cattle to market on this route. The grass on the east verge was grazed closer than the west, which meant the herd moved south. The fence line that appeared at the 2-mile mark was old but maintained. The posts were weathered, but the wire was newer, replaced in sections. Someone was keeping up with it, someone who didn't have enough hands to do it all at once, but who kept doing it anyway. She filed this away. Her hands were wrapped in cloth against the afternoon heat, which did nothing for the heat, but kept the dust out of the knuckle joints, where it ached. The left hand was the worst one. The fingers had healed at angles that still surprised her sometimes when she looked at them. Slight, but there, the knuckles too prominent, the grip still strong, but the fine movement limited to what she'd rebuilt through practice. She had rebuilt a great deal through practice. She had rebuilt most of herself that way. The ranch appeared at the end of the rutted track as the sun was beginning to drop. A modest operation, a house and a barn, and a series of outbuildings arranged with the practical logic of a man who had thought about function, and not much else. 40 head of cattle, maybe, in the south pasture. Fencing in reasonable repair, a water trough that needed scrubbing. She catalogued it without deciding to, the way she always catalogued spaces, exits, angles, the location of tools that could become weapons if they needed to, the location of weapons that were already weapons. Old habit, older than the hands. A man was crouched at the near fence line with his back to her, working a post. He didn't hear her approach, or he heard her and didn't turn, which was a different kind of information. She stopped at the edge of the yard and waited. He turned. He looked at her the way a man looks at a fence that needs mending. Not at her face first, not at her skin. Dark jade green, she knew how it read in this light. She had always known. But at her bag, her boots, the set of her shoulders, assessing what needed doing, not what it looked like. She had prepared for other things. She recalibrated. "All right," he said. His voice was flat and unhurried, the voice of a man who had stopped performing a long time ago. "It barns that way. Supper's at 6. He went back to the fence. Mara stood in the yard for a moment. The preparation she had made for hostility, the specific practice stillness she wore when she needed to be very careful, the particular arrangement of her face that gave nothing away, sat in her chest with nowhere to go. She let it sit. She picked up her bag and went to find the barn. The barn was dim and smelled of hay and cattle, and the particular dry wood smell of a building that had been standing in the sun for decades. She stood in the doorway and let her eyes adjust. 3 stalls, 2 occupied by horses, who looked at her with the mild suspicion of horses. The 3rd stall was empty. She saw the tally marks before she saw anything else. They were scratched into the wood of the empty stall, into the wall at about shoulder height, which meant whoever made them had been standing, not sitting. Sets of 5, the 5th line drawn through the other 4. She did not count them. She could see there were too many to count quickly, and she did not want to count them, and she did not examine why. She set her bag down. The blanket was on the rail, folded, not thrown, folded with the kind of automatic care that meant the hands had done it without the mind being fully present. A tin cup of water sat on the floor below it, placed with the same quality of attention. Deliberate, but not deliberate about being seen. She picked up the cup and drank half of it and set it back down. He had put these here before she arrived, which meant he had been expecting someone, which meant the indifference in the yard was not the whole story. She noted this. She did not decide what to do with it yet. The stall needed sweeping. She found a broom hanging on a nail near the barn door and swept it out, working from the back corners forward, methodical and unhurried. She shook out the blanket and refolded it. She moved her bag to the corner where the wall met the rail, where it would not be in the way, and where she would hear if anyone came close to it in the night. These were not dramatic preparations. They were the small, specific work of making a space safe enough to sleep in, which she had done in enough places that it no longer required thought. Outside, the light was going. The heat was going with it. Somewhere in the south pasture, one of the cattle made a low sound and went quiet. She sat down with her back against the wall, her bag at her feet, her hands flat on her thighs. The cloth wrapping was warm against her palms. She looked at the tally marks on the wall across from her, the sets of 5, too many to count without effort, and she did not count them. She listened. The ranch settled into night the way all working places did. The creak of cooling wood, the shift of the horses in their stalls, the distant sound of a door closing in the house. She read it the way she read everything, for what it didn't say. The man had not asked about her hands. He had not asked about her tusks. He had gone back to fixing fence. She did not know yet what to do with that either. She put her back to the wall, her hands flat on her thighs, and listened to the night come in around the edges of the barn, and she read it, and she waited to see what it would tell her. The wagon seat was narrow enough that their shoulders would have touched if either of them had sat differently. Neither of them did. Mara kept her weight to the right and watched the road come toward them in the early morning light, reading it the way she read everything, for what it didn't say. Harrow's Crossing was 4 miles from the ranch gate. She had not been into town since Vera Osk had processed her contract 3 days ago. She had no particular desire to go now. But Cale had a supply order to collect, and one man could not drive a loaded wagon and manage the team both. And he had said, the night before, setting his empty cup in the basin, "Supply run tomorrow, early." He had not asked. She had not answered. They had both understood it as settled. The town announced itself with smoke first, then sound, then the particular smell of a place where animals and people had been living in close quarters long enough to stop noticing each other. Mara noted the layout as they came in off the main track. The general store on the left, the livery set back from the road, the saloon at the near corner of the main street with its door propped open to catch the morning air, 3 horses at the rail, 2 men standing at the entrance. She clocked them before the wagon had fully stopped. The louder one was broad across the shoulders, the kind of broad that came from a life spent outdoors and from never having had a reason to make himself smaller. He was talking to the man beside him, shorter, there with the particular posture of someone who had learned to laugh at the right moments. Their conversation stopped when the wagon pulled up. The broad one looked at Kyle, then he looked at Mara. His mouth arranged itself into something that was not quite a smile. Scalloway's gone and hired himself a green mule. The shorter man laughed. It was a quick sound, practiced, the laugh of someone who had been providing that service for years. Behind the bar, visible through the open door, a third man was wiping down the counter. He did not laugh. He also did not look up. Mara stepped down from the wagon. She picked up the supply list from the bench where Cale had set it and walked toward the store. Her hands were steady. She noted this with the detached attention she gave to all useful information about her own body. The skin across her knuckles was dark jade, nearly black in the morning shadow of the building's overhang, and her grip on the paper was even. Good. She went inside. The supply counter ran the length of the back wall. The man behind it, Aldous Crane, she had his name from Vera's offhand, accounting of who ran what in Harrow's Crossing, was already moving toward her with the expression of a man who had heard the comment outside and was now performing the specific neutrality of someone who had decided it was not his business. Mara set the supply list on the counter. "A Callaway order," she said. Aldous found it without difficulty. He began pulling items, calling them off against the list in a flat professional voice, and Mara tracked each one. Flour, salt, lamp oil, 2 lengths of fence wire, a replacement buckle for the harness, against the paper in her hand. When he finished, he wrote the total in his ledger and turned it toward her. She looked at it. Then she looked at the original order slip, which Cale had given her along with the list. She set them side by side on the counter. The buckle had been entered twice. A small error, the kind that accumulated quietly over months, if no one checked. She picked up the pencil from the counter, drew a single line through the duplicate entry, wrote the corrected total below it, and turned the ledger back toward Aldous without comment. He looked at the correction. He looked at her. Something moved behind his eyes. Not gratitude, not embarrassment, something more careful than either. And he copied the corrected figure into his own record without speaking. He did not thank her, or he did not need to. The number was right now. That was the point. She carried the first load out to the wagon. Cale was loading the second. They worked without speaking, which was already becoming a pattern she had no objection to. And when the wagon was full and the team stood patient in the traces, Cale climbed up to the bench, and she climbed up beside him, and they turned back toward the ranch road. Joss Fetter, she had his name now, filed away with the rest of it, was still at the saloon entrance. He watched them go. She did not look at him. She looked at the road. They were a mile out before either of them spoke. Cale had both hands on the reins, easy, the way a man holds something he has held 10,000 times. His right hand had the faint tremor she had noticed in the mornings, the one that steadied by midday. He was looking at the road the same way she was. "Fetter's an ass," he said. He did not look at her when he said it. He said it the way he said most things, as a statement of observable fact, delivered to the middle distance. Take it or leave it. Mara looked at the road. "I know," she said. The wagon rolled on. A hawk turned slow circles over the dry grass to the south. The harness creaked in its familiar rhythm, and the horses moved at their steady pace, and the town fell away behind them, and neither of them said anything more. She was aware, without looking, that he had taken the longer route back. The road they were on curved wide around the eastern edge of town before rejoining the main track north. It added perhaps a quarter mile. She had not been on it before, but she had looked at enough of the surrounding terrain in the past 3 days to know it was not the direct way home. She did not ask about it. She filed it away instead. The small, deliberate fact of it, the way he had made the choice without announcing it, the way he had simply turned the horses and gone the longer way around. She set it next to the blanket on the stall rail and the tin cup of water on the floor, and she looked at what those things made together. And she did not yet have a word for it, but she had a category, and she put it there. The ranch gate came into view at the end of the track. The horses picked up their pace slightly, knowing home. Mara looked at the road ahead and did the math on what it meant that he had said it at all. Not the route, the other thing. The 2 words. Delivered to the middle distance. Now asking nothing back. She turned them over once, the way she turned over contract language, looking for the clause beneath the clause, the thing the words were standing in front of. She did not find anything alarming. That, too, went into the category. The wagon rolled through the gate and into the yard, and Cale set the brake and climbed down, and Mara climbed down after him, and the morning was already getting warm, and there was work to do, and neither of them said anything more about any of it. The cattle knew her by the 3rd morning. Not well, not the way they knew Cale, who moved through the herd with the particular ease of a man who had been doing it so long the animals had stopped registering him as separate from the landscape. But they had stopped shying when she came through the gate. And the roan heifer that had been most suspicious had begun following her at a distance of about 4 feet, which Mara took as a professional endorsement. She learned the ranch the way she learned contracts, from the edges in, where the fence line ran soft, which posts were sunk deep and which were held in place mostly by habit and optimism. How the water moved in the North Trough after a dry week. She learned which gate latch needed lifting before pulling and which needed pulling before lifting, and she learned this by doing it wrong once each and then not again. Cale did not explain the ranch to her. He worked it and she watched him work it, and she filed what she saw. The 2 cups were on the table every morning when she came in from the barn. 1 filled, steam rising, 1 empty, placed with the same deliberate spacing as the first, as if it were waiting for something. Cale was always already outside by the time she came in, which meant he rose before her, which meant he set the cups in the dark. She drank the full one and left the empty one where it was, and did not move it. His hands shook before mid-morning. She had noticed it on the second day. The slight tremor when he lifted the coffee cup, the way he wrapped both hands around it, and waited. By the time the sun was properly up, the shaking was gone, replaced by the steady economy of a man who knew exactly what his hands were for. She did not remark on it. It was not her business. She filed it under not a threat, and moved on. The grave marker was at the edge of the north pasture, set back from the fence line by about 10 yards, in the shade of the only tree on that side of the property worth calling a tree. She found it on the 4th morning, checking the north fence for the soft posts Cale had mentioned needing to replace before the season turned. The marker was plain wood, well made, the letters cut deep enough to last. Callaway, November. Mara stood in front of it for a moment. The roan heifer had followed her to the fence line and stood behind her now, breathing. The grass around the marker had been cleared recently. Not today, but within the week. Someone had been here. She turned and went back to the fence. He asked about her hands that afternoon. They were working the east pasture, Cale driving the post-hole digger into ground that had baked to near iron in the summer heat, Mara holding the new post steady. The cloth wrapping on her left hand had come loose at the wrist, and she had tucked the end back under without stopping. But he had seen it. He didn't ask immediately. He finished the hole, set the digger aside, and took the post from her. When it was seated, he said, without looking up, "Oh, how'd that happen?" Not a question. A statement with a question shape. Mara looked at the post. "War chief," she said. "Well, I kept the clan's contracts. He wanted numbers changed. I didn't change them." She paused. He had the bones reset wrong on purpose. Both hands. Cale was tamping the base of the post with the flat of the digger. He did not stop. "Can you still grip a fence post?" he said, and yes. He handed her the post-hole digger and moved to the next marked spot. She followed. That was the whole of it. "No, I'm sorry." No long pause in which she was meant to feel the weight of his sympathy. He had asked what he needed to know, received the answer, but confirmed she could do the work, and moved on. Mara turned the digger in her wrapped hands and felt something she did not immediately have a name for, something that sat in the chest adjacent to relief. Not quite the same thing, quieter. She drove the digger into the ground and began. Vera Osk's store smelled like dried herbs and old paper, and the particular sweetness of the hard candy Vera kept in a jar on the counter, for reasons she had never explained. Mara went in the late afternoon for thread. The hem of her work shirt had come loose and she had been ignoring it for 3 days, which was 2 days longer than was practical. Mrs. Pruitt and Darcy Holt were at the far end of the counter when Mara came through the door. They stopped talking. Mara went to the thread display and found the color she needed. Behind her, she heard the 2 women resume their conversation. Not the same conversation, a new one, constructed entirely for the purpose of having something to say while they waited for her to leave. The weather. The Steen family's new fence, whether the post wagon had been running late. Mara brought the thread to the counter. Vera was already reaching for the ledger. "I'll put it on your account," Vera said. Mara looked at her. Vera had the ledger open and was writing Mara's name at the top of a fresh page. Duskhollow, M. In her careful, deliberate hand. The pen scratched, the name settled into the paper. "All right," Mara said. She took the thread and left. Behind her, Mrs. Pruitt said something to Darcy Holt in a lower register, and Darcy Holt made a sound that might have been agreement. Mara walked out into the cooling afternoon and did not look back. A name in the ledger. A page. It was not nothing. That night she sat outside the barn on the upturned water bucket she had been using as a step, the cloth wrapping off her hands, letting the air get at the skin. The evening had gone cool fast, the way it did now that they were sliding toward autumn, and the dark came down with weight to it. She looked at her hands in what was left of the light. The left one, the worse one. The fingers at their slight angles, the knuckles raised and prominent. The grip still strong, but the fine movement gone in two of them. She had learned to shoot with the right hand first, and the left hand second, and the left had eventually become the better of the two, which was the kind of thing that happened when you had enough time and nothing else to do with it. She flexed the fingers once, slowly. They moved. Somewhere out past the fence line, in the direction of the north pasture, the tree stood in the dark above the grave marker. She could not see it from here. She knew where it was. Callaway, November. She did not go there. She had no reason to go there. She had learned what she needed to learn about the north fence and the soft posts and the way the water moved in the trough after a dry week, and the grave marker was not part of any of that. She looked at her hands a moment longer. Then she looked toward the north pasture, where the dark was the same as the dark everywhere else, and she did not go there, and she did not count the days on the marker, and she did not ask. But she knew where it was now. Knowing felt like something she had not been meant to have. Pell arrived the way he always arrived, without warning and with opinions already formed. Mara was splitting kindling at the side of the barn when she heard him come through the gate, his boots loud on the dry ground, counting fence posts under his breath the way other people counted steps. He stopped at 7, looked at her and said, "That's 43 days since you got here." She set the hatchet and picked up the next piece of wood. "Course, is it, Cale smiled twice. Pell dropped onto the fence rail like he'd been invited. At both times with his back turned. Once when you fixed the north gate without being asked, and once when you corrected Aldous Crane's bill and didn't say anything about it after. He held up 2 fingers, already confirming the count for himself. "I'm keeping track. And I noticed, Yeta. Or why don't you carry your gun where people can see it?" She looked at him then. He was 9 and serious, and his eyes had the particular quality of someone who had learned early that watching carefully was a form of protection. She understood that quality. She set the wood on the block and picked up the hatchet. Because then they'd know where to aim. Pell counted the words on his fingers. His lips moved. He looked up. 9 words. That's the most you've said to me at once. And don't push your luck. He grinned and went back to counting fence posts. The trouble came on the road into town, one which was where trouble tended to come from. The stretch between the ranch gate and the Harrows Crossing livery, where the land was flat and open, and there was nowhere to be that wasn't visible. Burlstein's hands were riding back from the eastern grazing land, 3 of them, and they pulled their horses wide when they saw Mara and Pell on the road with the empty supply cart. Not wide because of the cart. Wide the way men move when they want the gesture to be noticed. The one in front, she had heard his name, Cord, remembered it the way she remembered all names, filed and available, leaned from the saddle and said to his companions, but loud enough, "Or careful, boys, she might charge." The other 2 laughed. Cord looked at Mara with the flat expectation of a man who had never once had to consider what came after. Pell, beside her on the cart bench, went very still. His hands found each other in his lap. Mara looked at the road ahead. Her hands were flat on her thighs, the left one with its angled fingers, the right one steady. She did not turn her head. She kept the horse moving at the same pace it had been moving, and the 3 riders passed, and the sound of them faded, and Pell let out a breath that was too careful to be accidental. "You should have, he started. "No mas." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Why not?" She thought about how to say it in a way a 9-year-old could file away and use later. "Because there were 3 of them, and one of me and you were sitting next to me. You do the math." Pell did the math. She could see him doing it, his lips moving slightly, the way they did when he was counting something that mattered. He didn't say anything else until they reached the livery. When they got back to the ranch, Pell told Cale. He didn't editorialize. He stated the facts in the order they happened, the way Mara had noticed he always did when something had actually bothered him. The performance came out when things were small. The precision came out when things were not. He said Cord's name. He said what Cord said. He said Mara hadn't responded. Cale was at the workbench in the barn, replacing a hinge. He went still in the middle of it. Not the stillness of surprise. The other kind, the kind that came after, when the thing had already landed, and the body was deciding what to do with it. His hand stayed on the hinge but stopped moving. He said, all right, eat. Pell waited. Kyle said, "Go on home, Pell." Pell went, but slowly, and Mara could see him counting something on his fingers as he walked through the gate. Cale picked up the hinge and set it down again. Then he picked up his fencing tools and walked out toward the eastern pasture without a word, and Mara watched him go from the barn doorway, the set of his shoulders, the particular way he moved when the anger had no target it was permitted to reach, and she understood something about what she was looking at. Grief redirected into labor for long enough that it no longer knew another form. She had seen it before. She recognized the shape of it, the way you recognize a tool that has been used for the wrong job so many times it has worn to fit. She went inside and made supper. Beans, because there were beans. Cornbread, because the meal needed something solid. Coffee, because it was that kind of evening. She moved through the small kitchen with the efficiency of someone who had cooked in worse conditions with less. Ship galleys, campfires, the back of Delacroix's trading wagon with the rain coming through the canvas. And she did not think about what she was doing until she had already done it. 2 cups, both on the table, one on his side, one on hers. She stood and looked at them, the empty cup in the morning. Every morning she had seen it, the one he filled and the one he left, the habit his hands had that his mind had stopped arguing with. She had not thought about it when she set the second cup down. Her hands had simply done it, the way hands do when they have been paying attention longer than the mind has admitted to. She did not move the cup. The door opened. Carl came in from the dark, hands raw from 3 hours of fence work, the kind of rawness that was not entirely about fence work. He stopped in the doorway. He looked at the table. Both cups, the larger portion of cornbread on his side, placed there without announcement. Mara did not move. She stood at the stove with the coffee pot and waited for whatever came next, her face arranged in the flat, factual expression she wore when she was not certain what she had just done or what it would cost her. Cale crossed the room and sat down. He wrapped both hands around his cup. The shaking that was mostly gone by evening, the calloused palms, the knuckles that had taken the fence post's weight all afternoon. And he looked at the coffee and did not say anything. Mara sat across from him and wrapped her own hands around the other cup. The dark jade green of her skin against the tin, but the angled fingers of her left hand finding their grip. She looked at the table. Neither of them spoke. Outside, on his way home through the last of the light, Pell passed the kitchen window. He slowed. He looked in at the two figures at the table, both cups held, the silence between them the specific kind that is not empty. His lips moved. He held up 3 fingers. Then he looked at them, reconsidered, and said to no one in particular. That's twice he smiled. But this one, his face did it from the front. He went home counting something, though he didn't say what. Pell arrived on foot, which meant he'd run the whole way from town. Mara saw him from the east pasture, the particular loping gait of a boy who had decided something was urgent, but hadn't decided yet whether to show it. She set down the wire stretcher and watched him come. He was holding a folded note in one fist, arm out like he was delivering something official, which meant Vera had sent him. Vera did not send Pell for small things. She met him at the fence line. He handed her the note without speaking, which was unusual enough that she looked at his face before she opened it. His mouth was doing the thing it did when he was counting and had arrived at a number he didn't like. The note was 4 words. Vera's handwriting, small and level, company coming, clan business. Mara read it twice. Then she folded it along its original crease and put it in her breast pocket, next to the labor contract she still carried out of habit. Her hands went flat against her thighs. She stood there for a moment, with the late afternoon light coming sideways across the pasture, and the smell of dry grass and cattle, and the particular iron smell of the wire she'd been stretching. And she did the math on how much time she had and what she needed to do with it. Pell was still watching her. She said, "Go home." He opened his mouth. Pell dot. He went. Cale was at the water trough, running a hand along the seam where it had been leaking. He looked up when she came across the yard. He read her face, or read the absence of her face, which was the same thing, and straightened. She told him. All of it. She had not planned to tell him all of it, but the note had collapsed whatever timeline she'd been working with, and there was no version of the next 3 days that did not require him to know. So she told him in the flat, declarative sentences that came out of her when she was frightened and needed to stay functional. The war chief, Gravik, the land agreement, or the ledgers she had refused to falsify, and what it had cost her. The labor broker who had listed her as strong-backed and compliant, and had not mentioned her name, or her hands, or anything else that was true about her. She told him about the broken hands, not as a story, as a fact. The way you'd report a fence post that had been set wrong and then hardened in the wrong position. She told him about Delacroix and the 2-year traveling contract and what she had learned during it. She told him that whoever Vera had seen coming was almost certainly Drav Stoneback, because Gravik sent Drav when he wanted something done correctly and without unnecessary noise. She stopped. The water trough dripped once into the dirt. Cale said, "All right, She waited. He said, "There's coffee." She stared at him. The light was going amber and long across the yard, and somewhere in the north pasture one of the cattle lowed and went quiet. And Cale was looking at her with the same expression he used on fence lines and water troughs, assessing what needed doing, not what it looked like. He said, "He's not here yet." She went inside and poured the coffee. Her hands were steady. They were always steady when she needed them to be. The tremor, when it came later, in the dark, when there was nothing left to do with them. She wrapped them around the cup and stood at the window and looked at the yard. Cale came in after a while and sat at the table. He said, "How can you handle what's coming?" She turned from the window. She thought about how to answer that and decided the only answer worth giving was the accurate one. She told him about Delacroix, not the whole of it, but the relevant portion, the accounts she'd kept, the routes they'd traveled, the specific arrangement by which she had learned to shoot. She did not tell him how fast she was. Speed was not something you described. It was something you demonstrated or you didn't. She said, "Russ, I can handle it." He nodded once. He got up and went to check the water trough again, and she understood that this was what his trust looked like. Not a declaration, not a question, just the nod and then the return to the next necessary thing. She stood at the window and watched him crouch by the trough in the fading light, and thought that she'd been assessed by a great many people in her life, and very few of them had done it that cleanly. Drav Stoneback arrived at dusk. He came alone, which was either a courtesy or a statement about how seriously he took the situation. Mara assessed the distance from the barn to the gate and the angle of the light and the position of his hands before she assessed his face, and then she assessed his face, and it told her what she already knew. He was not angry. He was working. He stopped his horse at the edge of the yard. He looked at her, then at Carl, who had come to stand in the yard without being asked. Then he looked back at Mara and took a folded document from his coat and read from it in a flat professional voice. The formal ultimatum, the clan's language, the terms: return within 3 days and face clan judgment, or be declared dead to the clan and hunted as a fugitive under the full authority of the Dusk Hollow war chief. He read it without inflection. He folded the document and put it back in his coat. He looked at her. "You were always the smart one, Mara," he said. "Be smart now." He turned his horse and rode. The sound of hooves on the dry road carried a long time in the evening air. Mara stood in the yard and listened to it diminish and did not move. Beside her, Cale stood without speaking, without touching, without moving away. Just present, just there, the specific solid fact of him in the cooling air. And he stayed there until the sound was fully gone and the night had closed over the place where it had been. Then he went inside. Mara stayed in the yard. The dark was coming up from the east the way it did out here, vast and total, and the first stars were already fixed and hard above the pasture. She looked at her hands, the angled fingers, the prominent knuckles. But the left hand, the one that had learned to shoot because the right one couldn't hold the fine adjustments anymore, the one that had put a bullet through a tin can at 60 yards that morning without thinking about it. She had been the smart one. Gravik had said it 2 years ago, when he'd first put her across the table from the human traders. "You're the smart one, Mara. Don't waste it." He had meant, "Be useful to me." He had not meant anything else by it. She said to the dark quietly, the way you'd say something you'd been carrying for a long time and had finally set down. Still water doesn't announce itself. She stood there another moment. The grass moved once in a breath of wind and went still. Then she said to no one, to the dark, or to the road where the sound of Drav's horse had been. I already was. The eastern pasture fence had 3 bad posts and a section of wire that had rusted through at the splice. Mara had found all of it on her morning walk and gone back to the barn for the tools without telling Cale, because the work was visible and the work was hers, and that was the whole of the conversation required. She worked in the flat heat of early afternoon, the sun pressing down on the back of her neck, her dark jade-green skin absorbing it without complaint. Her body had always run warm. She had stopped noticing it somewhere around age 12. The fencing tool was a good one. Carl kept his tools in better condition than he kept himself. And the wire splice came apart cleanly when she worked the tension out of it. She set the bad section aside, measured the replacement length, and began threading it through the post staples with the methodical patience of someone who has learned that most problems are just work that hasn't been done yet. She heard the horses before she saw them, 3 of them, coming up the eastern track at a pace that was not hurried but was not casual either. She did not look up immediately. She finished the staple she was setting. Jos Fetter, 2 of Burlstein's hands behind him, the one called Wick, and a younger man she didn't know the name of. They pulled up at the fence line, and Fetter leaned forward on his saddle horn with the particular ease of a man who has never had to think about whether he was welcome somewhere. "Calloway around?" he said. "On North End." Mara set the fencing tool against the post and straightened. "Grazing a rights question. You can leave a note at Vera's." Fetter smiled the way men smiled when they had already decided the conversation was going a certain direction. Just being neighborly. He looked at the fence, at the tools, at her hands. Didn't know Calloway was keeping a pet. Wick laughed. The younger man looked at the ground, which meant he was not entirely comfortable, but was not going to say so. Mara looked at Ferta. She did not say anything. The silence went on long enough that Wick reached over and picked up an empty tin can from the fence post, where someone, Carl probably on a previous workday, had left it sitting. He rode to the post 60 yards down the line and set the can on top of it, with a small, deliberate care that was its own kind of mockery. Then he rode back. Bet she can't even lift a rifle, he said. The Mara set down the fencing tool. What happened next did not take long. Her right hand went to the revolver at her hip and came back with it, but it was her left hand that took the grip. The damaged hand, the fingers at their slight angles, the knuckles prominent against the dark green of her skin. And she raised it without hurry, without drama, with the specific economy of someone who has done this so many times that the motion has worn a groove in her that goes all the way down to the bone. She did not aim in any way that looked like aiming. She simply looked at the tin can 60 yards away, and the gun went off. The can rang off the post and hit the dry grass and was still. Mara broke the cylinder, ejected the spent case, reloaded from the loops on her belt. She did not look at them while she did it. When the cylinder was closed, she holstered the gun, picked up the fencing tool, and went back to the splice. Behind her, 3 horses left at speed. She finished the splice. She moved to the next post and tested it for depth, found it solid, moved on. The work took another hour and a half. When she was done, the fence was right, and the tools were clean, and the tin can was still in the grass 60 yards away, and she left it there. Carl had watched it from the north fence. She knew this the way she knew most things about him, not because he told her, but because she had learned the particular geometry of his silences. He came back from the north end at his usual time, put his tools away, washed his hands at the pump. Supper was beans and salt pork and the last of the week's cornbread, and they ate it the way they had eaten most meals, without wasted words, with the specific companionable quiet of 2 people who have stopped needing to fill the air between them. He waited until she had her coffee before he said anything. Delacroix teach you that? Minen, yes. When good teacher. Mais. He was amné. Cale wrapped his hands around his cup. The morning tremor was long gone by this hour. His hands were steady at night, which she had noticed and filed away and not commented on. He looked at the table for a moment. Then, you didn't tell me. That you didn't ask. He looked up. His eyes were the particular grey of weathered fencewood, and they were doing the thing they did when he was thinking more than he was saying, which was most of the time. I'm asking now for... Mara set her cup down. Outside, and the dark had come in full, and the ranch had gone quiet the way it did. The cattle settling, the small sounds of the structure cooling. She thought about Delacroix, about the 2 years on the road, about the particular afternoon he had put a revolver in her damaged hand and said the left hand is fine, the left hand is better, stop apologizing for it. She thought about what it had cost her to learn that he was right. What do you want to know? She said. He did not deflect. He stayed at the table, both hands around the cup, and asked, how long were you with him? At 2 years. Traveling contract. I kept his accounts. He taught me to shoot. Fair trade. Where'd you go? Everywhere between here and the coast. He traded in dry goods and information. Mostly information. She paused. He was a careful man. He taught me to be careful too. Cale nodded slowly. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, why'd you stay? After Stoneback came. She had known the question was coming. She had been turning the answer over since the night Drav rode away, and she had stood in the yard with her hands flat against her thighs and said, I already was to the dark, to no one, to herself. Still water doesn't announce itself, she said. He looked at her. The words sat between them, and he turned them over, and she could see that he did not have the key to them yet, that they meant something she was not going to explain. Not tonight. Maybe not for a long time. She took her cup to the wash basin. She rinsed it and set it on the rail and did not look back at him. "Good night," she said. She went to the barn. Her Kale sat at the table with his empty cup and the words he didn't have the key to yet. Still water doesn't announce itself. He turned it over. He looked at the place where she had been sitting. He looked at his own hands, steady now, wrapped around a cup that had gone cold. Outside, somewhere in the direction of the eastern pasture, the fence was mended and the posts were standing, and the tin can was still in the grass where it had fallen. 60 yards from where she had put it, without hurrying, without performing. With her left hand, the damaged one, like it was simply the next thing that needed doing. The town of Harrow's Crossing was already adjusting to what it had learned today. He could feel it from 6 miles out, the way you feel a change in weather before it arrives. He sat with the empty cup a while longer. Then he got up and set it in the wash basin next to hers. The third morning came in flat and pale, the sky the color of old ash, and Mara was already dressed before the light was full. She wrapped her hands in the dark by feel, the cloth going around the left one first, the fingers that didn't quite close the way they used to, and she did not light the lamp. She did not want to explain herself to the light. She left before Kale came out of the house. The 6 miles into Harrow's Crossing felt different walking towards something than walking away from it. The road was the same road, the same ruts baked to iron, the same scrub at the verge, the same smell of dry grass and cattle and distance. But her body read it differently now. Threat assessment ran on its own, the way it always did. Sight lines, cover, the angle of the sun, and which direction a horse would come from if it came fast. She catalogued the road the way she catalogued everything. It kept her hands from shaking. She was afraid. She knew this because her narration had gone flat and practical, and she had stopped noticing anything that wasn't useful. Harrow's Crossing was awake when she arrived. Not busy, it was never busy, but awake in the way of a town that had heard something was coming and had arranged itself to watch. Aldous Crane was visible through the saloon window. Vera Osk was sweeping her porch with the particular deliberateness of a woman who intended to stay outside. Mrs. Pruitt stood in her doorway with her arms folded, not hostile, just present. Jos Vetter was at the saloon entrance, and for once he said nothing. He looked at Mara and then looked at the middle distance and stayed there. Trav Stoneback was already in the road. He was standing at the center of it, in full sun, the way a professional stands. Weight even, hands loose, nothing wasted. He had ridden in at dawn, probably. He had been waiting. He looked at her the way he always looked at her, with the specific regret of a man who liked her and was going to do his job anyway. Mara. His voice carried without effort. She stopped 12 feet from him, counted exits without meaning to. One alley left, one right, the post office behind her, open ground ahead. She said, "My drav.t. You know how this goes. I know how you want it to go." He looked at her for a moment. The regret was still there. "Gravik's not asking anymore, you understand that. This is the formal declaration. While you come back and face the accounting, or you're dead to the clan and I'm authorized to treat you accordingly." Her hands were flat against her thighs. She could feel the cloth wrapping on the left one, the slight angles of the fingers underneath. She said, "The ledgers were accurate. That's not what this is about anymore. It's what it was always about." Drav looked at her for a long moment. Then he drew. She had already drawn. She had drawn while he was still deciding to, while the decision was forming in the muscles of his shoulder, because she had been watching his shoulder and not his hand, and she had learned this from Delacroix on a flat stretch of Nevada scrubland 6 years ago. The man saying, "The hand is the last thing that moves. Don't watch the hand," she fired. The shot hit the cylinder of his revolver with a sound like a bell struck wrong, and the gun locked and his shot went wide left and kicked up dust 6 feet from her boot. The silence afterward was the loudest thing she had ever heard. Drav looked at his gun, then he looked at her. His expression did not change much, but something behind it shifted. A recalculation, deep and thorough. She said, "And tell Gravik the ledgers were accurate. They still are." Her voice was flat and even, and she was more frightened than she had been in 2 years. "I kept copies." Drav looked past her. She did not turn to look. She knew, because she had heard the footsteps, a specific weight, a specific pace, the sound of boots she had been listening to for 7 weeks, and she knew where he was standing without looking, close, not in front of her, but beside her. Drav looked at Cale for a long moment, then he looked back at Mara. The recalculation finished itself somewhere behind his eyes, and he nodded once. Not agreement, not defeat, something more like acknowledgement. And he holstered the locked gun and walked to his horse. He mounted. He looked down at her from the saddle. "You were always the smart one," he said. The same words as before, but the meaning had shifted. He was not trying to move her now. He was just saying a true thing. He rode. Jos Vetter went inside the saloon and closed the door. The sound of it was very small. Vera Osk stopped sweeping. She looked at Mara across the road with an expression that was not surprise and not quite pride, and was mostly just Vera, and then she went inside. Mara stood in the road with her revolver at her side and waited for her hands to stop shaking. They did not stop for a while. She looked at the dust Drav's horse had raised, already settling, and she breathed, and she did not count anything. Cale said nothing. He was still beside her. She could feel the specific heat of a person standing close in the cooling morning air, and she did not move away from it. They walked back. The 6 miles unreeled the same way they always did. The scrub, the ruts, the dry grass. But the light had changed. The sun higher now, the shadows shorter. And Mara walked and did not think about the road or the sight lines or the angles of approach. Her threat assessment had gone quiet. She did not know what to do with the quiet. Halfway back, Cale reached out and took her hand. The left one. The damaged one. His fingers closed around hers. The angled ones. The prominent knuckles. The cloth wrapping still on. And he held it the way a man holds something he is not going to explain and is not going to let go of. He said nothing. He looked at the road ahead. She looked down at their joined hands. His knuckles were rough and reddened, the hands of a man who had been working alone for 2.5 years, and showed it. Against them, her skin was dark jade green, weathered darker at the knuckles, and the contrast was simply what it was, 2 sets of damaged hands holding. She did not pull away. She looked at the road ahead. The grass was the color of old rope in the morning light. Somewhere behind them, at a distance that was exactly right, she could hear Pell's footsteps in the scrub. The boy who followed everything, who counted everything. B who would report this to no one and everyone simultaneously. She heard him say, quietly, to no one. 3 times. But this one, I think he didn't know he was doing it. They walked the rest of the 6 miles in silence, hands joined, and it was the loudest silence the story had produced. The tally marks were in sets of 5. Mara had known that since the first night. She had put her back to the wall and not counted them, and in the week since she had walked past them every morning without looking directly, the way you don't look directly at something that belongs to someone else. But the threat was gone now. Drav was 2 days' ride behind her and getting farther, and the clan's claim on her had been filed away in the same place she filed everything that was finished, accurately, completely, and without sentiment. What remained was the ranch, and the fence, and the ledgers that were genuinely a disaster, and the tally marks on the wall of the empty stall that she had been not counting for 6 weeks. She counted them in the morning light, while Cale was at the water trough. 912. She was still standing there when she heard his boots on the barn floor behind her. "Now what were you counting?" she said. Not a question. The way she stated facts when she wanted an answer. He stopped. She heard him look at the wall. heard the pause that meant he was deciding something. Days since November, he said. She had known that too, in the way she knew most things about this place. By accumulation, by the grave marker at the north pasture edge, by the empty cup set out every morning beside the full one. She had filed it and not touched it. And now she touched it. "How many?" she said. 912. She looked at the marks. Sets of 5, scratched with something narrow, a nail maybe, or the tip of a knife. Each set careful, each set the same size. A man making sure the count was right. "That's a lot of mornings," she said. "Yeah." Neither of them moved. The barn held the particular quiet of early autumn, the light coming in at a low angle and laying itself across the straw in long, pale strips. Mara looked at the marks for another moment. Then she raised her left hand, the damaged one, the fingers at their slight angles, the knuckles prominent against the dark jade green of her skin, and touched the wall once, not counting, not tracing, just acknowledging that they were there, that someone had made them. That 912 mornings was a real number and not a thing to be smoothed over. She put her hand down. She did not say she was sorry. She had learned that sorry was what people said when they didn't know what else to do with the weight of something. And Cale Calloway was not a man who needed the weight redistributed. He needed it witnessed. She had witnessed it. She walked past him toward the morning. He didn't say anything. That was right. The coffee was already made when she came in from checking the eastern fence line. 2 cups on the table, both filled. He had pushed one toward her side without ceremony, the way he did everything, and gone back to reading the water rights document she had pulled from the bottom of his ledger pile 3 days ago. She had flagged it with a strip of cloth. He had looked at the flag, but looked at her, and said nothing, which meant he understood it mattered. She sat down and wrapped her hands around the cup. The warmth moved through her palms and into the stiff places in her fingers, the joints that never fully loosened in the mornings anymore. She had stopped noticing this the way she had stopped noticing most things about her body that couldn't be changed, catalogued, filed, worked around. But the warmth was good. It was specifically good this morning, in this kitchen, with the light coming through the east window and the water rights documents spread between them and both cups full. Cale set the document down. He looked at it for a moment. Not at her. "I used to think quiet meant empty," he said. He didn't finish it. She looked at the side of his face, the set of his jaw, the way his hands rested on the table. But still now, the morning tremor already worked out. He was not a man who said things he hadn't already turned over several times. This one had been turned over for a while. She didn't answer. She drank her coffee and let the sentence sit where he'd put it. After a moment, he picked up the water rights document again, and she reached across and tapped the 3rd clause from the bottom. "And that one," she said. "That's the one they'll use if Steen pushes the grazing boundary again. You need to file a counter record with the land office before the first frost or the window closes." He read the clause. Read it again. "How long have you known about this?" "Since Tuesday." He looked at her. "You could have said, yeah, I'm saying now." She took the document back and set it in front of her. "Emma, I'll write the filing. You sign it. We take it to Vera before the end of the week." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "All right, bye." She pulled the ledger toward her and opened it to the back pages, where she had been reconstructing his accounts from the receipts she'd found in the tin box under the workbench. 3 years of receipts in no particular order, some of them water-stained, all of them accurate, none of them organized. She had organized them. The picture they made was not as bad as she'd feared, and not as good as it should have been, and she had a list of corrections that would take about 4 conversations with Aldous Crane and 1 firmly worded letter to the cattle broker in Milford who had been skimming on the commission. She said, I'm not going back. Cale set his cup down. The contract runs 3 more weeks. She said, I'm not talking about the contract. I'm talking about after Dutz. She kept her eyes on the ledger. I'll need to renegotiate the terms. A pause. All right, Dutch. Longer than 6 months. All right, Damas. And I want full access to the accounts, not just the current ledger. All of it, back to the beginning. Your accounts are a mess. Something moved across his face. Not quite a smile. His face did it from the front, which she had learned was rarer than the other kind, and which meant something different. He said, all right. She wrote the first line of the land office filing and did not look up, because she did not need to, because she already knew what was in the room. That evening she sat outside the barn in the cooling dark with her hands unwrapped and resting open on her knees. The air had the first real edge of autumn in it, one the kind that arrived quietly and stayed. Her hands lay palm up in her lap, the angled fingers, the prominent knuckles, the dark jade green of her skin going almost black at the joints in the low light. The nicked tusk caught the last of the sun, the left one, slightly asymmetrical. The nick so old she only remembered it existed when something caught the light at the right angle. Cale came and sat beside her. Close enough. He reached over, without looking at her, and touched the nicked tusk once with one finger. Not asking, not explaining, just acknowledging that it was there, that it was hers, that he had noticed it a long time ago and was only now saying so. She went still. Then she did not move away. They sat in the cooling dark and said nothing, and the grass at the edge of the yard was the color of old rope in the last of the sun. And somewhere out in the north pasture a cow lowed once and went quiet, and still water doesn't announce itself. It just gets where it's going, and she was already here, and she had been for a long time, and she had not needed to say so.